A multitude shall awaken. One part drawn toward the light. One part falling into blackened waters. Not all who see shall truly see. Not all who sleep shall remain asleep. Quatrain 41, Century 8, Nostradamus. You won't find this verse in any school textbook. No historian or prophecy scholar puts it on the front page. And among the hundreds of chilling predictions made by Nostradamus, this may be the most overlooked. Or perhaps, the most dangerous. It speaks of no war. No natural disaster. No kings, no empires, no apocalypse. It speaks of a quiet split. Not unfolding on the world stage, but deep within the soul of humankind. Not a division of nations. Not a conflict between rich and poor, man or woman, faith or ideology. But a rift between those who awaken, and those who remain asleep. And the most terrifying part is this. The split has already begun. Can you feel it? Not with your eyes. Not with your ears. But with that nameless sensation. When you stand in a crowded room. And still feel completely alone. When you quietly observe the world and suddenly sense. Something is wrong. Dreams begin to twist. Time no longer flows the way it used to. Truth becomes harder to recognize, slippery, masked, fragmented. And you begin to wonder. Maybe you no longer belong to the world you once believed in. In this video, we will step into that forgotten quatrain. We will uncover its buried layers of meaning. And more importantly, we will hold it up to the reality unfolding before our eyes. Because if Nostradamus was right, and if this prophecy was more than metaphor, then perhaps we are no longer living in a unified world, but entering an era of two parallel realities, where every soul must choose a path. One toward light. One adrift in shadow. No one can choose for you. But the choice has already begun. Walk with us, before the door of awareness quietly closes. Part 1, Decoding Quatrain 41 and the Spiritual Fracture of Humanity. Quatrain 41, from Century 8 of Nostradamus' Les Prophéties, never drew as much attention as his predictions of emperors, plagues, or great fires. It lacks the dramatic imagery of the Twin Cities collapsing or an Eastern prince conquering Europe. But when read slowly, and placed within the context of our present age, this obscure quatrain begins to look like a carefully encrypted warning. A multitude shall awaken. One part drawn toward the light. One part falling into blackened waters. Not all who see shall truly see. Not all who sleep shall remain asleep. At first glance, it reads like poetic mysticism. But if we understand that Nostradamus often used metaphor to explore internal, spiritual processes, then it becomes clear. He wasn't predicting a physical event, he was describing a global metaphysical shift. A multitude shall awaken. This opening line arrests the reader. Nostradamus didn't write one man or a small group. He wrote a multitude. That implies a mass awakening, not triggered simultaneously, but inevitably unfolding. A tremor, not of the earth, but of the soul. A moment when a portion of humanity begins to realize they have been living a life that was never truly their own. And what awakens them? Not doctrine. Not politics. Not organized religion. But an internal surge, something inexplicable. A quiet inner knowing that the material world is a veil. And behind it, is something far more real. One part drawn toward the light, one part falling into blackened waters. This is the pivotal line. Nostradamus wasn't describing a clash between nations. Not a battle of good versus evil in the conventional sense. He was describing two spiritual paths, two vibrational frequencies, that every soul will eventually be drawn to choose. Light here doesn't just mean belief or enlightenment. It means clarity, presence, and the ability to pierce illusions that have kept humanity asleep. Blackened waters symbolize the opposite. Lower vibrations rooted in fear, confusion, emotional chaos, addiction, and manipulation. And the verse doesn't say that good go to the light. It says one part, implying that the divide isn't moral, but vibrational, based on how deeply one can perceive the truth. Not all who see shall truly see. This line reads like a paradox, but it's a universal truth echoed across ancient mystical traditions. Eyes wide open, yet blind. Ears unstopped, yet deaf. A soul intact, yet unable to feel its own presence. The message is stark. Awakening doesn't come through the senses. It comes from a deeper frequency, what mystics have long called the soul's intuition. This is how the fracture begins. On one side, people who recognize the signs, and act to align their lives with a deeper truth. On the other, those who refuse, or simply cannot see anything beyond the surface illusion. Not all who sleep shall remain asleep. The final line is both a glimmer of hope, and a quiet warning. It affirms that the potential for awakening exists in everyone. No soul is excluded. But it also implies that this window will not stay open forever. Like two trains departing on separate tracks. They may remain in sight for a while, but eventually, their paths diverge completely. By then, many will not even realize the split occurred. This is not a future prophecy. It is a current phenomenon. Quatrain 41 does not predict some future catastrophe. It speaks of a present rupture, happening right now, within every individual. A fracture. One side moving toward awareness. The other trapped in a prolonged trance. And Nostradamus, centuries ago, didn't just foresee it. He left behind a poetic mirror, a reminder that once you truly see, you can never unsee again. Part 2, The Silent Schism, when souls share space but no longer see each other. There were no alarms. No declarations from the United Nations. No breaking news flashing across national TV. And no sound of violence. The separation Nostradamus foresaw did not arrive with sirens or gunfire. It arrived with frequencies. With vibrations. With an invisible layering of reality. Right here in the space we all still think we share. We live on the same planet. But no longer in the same reality. Have you ever felt this? Sitting beside someone you love. Experiencing the same event. Yet feeling two completely different truths. One person feels deeply moved, the other, indifferent. One senses strange signs in the world, the other dismisses it as fake news. One feels time fracturing, the other stares blankly, not understanding. This is not a matter of opinion. It is a dislocation of perception. It begins subtly, like a crack so faint you might dismiss it. But slowly, the distance between these two soul groups widens. The awakened, living in a multi-layered reality. Those who are awakening begin to experience what we might call multidimensional awareness. They don't follow a specific religion. They don't claim enlightenment. They don't even want to speak much about it. But they are no longer living entirely in this world. They encounter recurring coincidences, known as synchronicities. They dream of something, and the next day, see it manifested in sound, image, or encounter. They sense that time is no longer flowing linearly, but expanding and folding, as though parts of reality are being torn open. This is not pathology. It is not delusion. It is a sign of spiritual frequency shifting. A recalibration that allows the soul to break free from the dominant vibrational field. They haven't gone anywhere. But they're no longer here in the same way. The unawakened, dreaming through the daylight. Meanwhile, the rest of humanity, those whom Nostradamus called the sleepers, continue to live, work, laugh, and carry on. But their souls are veiled, as if covered by a thin, invisible fog. They drown in endless streams of news. They get emotionally entangled in social media arguments, often not knowing why they're so angry. They consume to fill a void, only to find the void emptier than before. They collect knowledge like trophies, but can no longer distinguish what is real. They are not evil. They are not ignorant. They are simply asleep, trapped in a collective dream manufactured by media, marketing, and a system that has no interest in their awakening. And so, the split deepens. Without screaming, without panic, without escape. You can live with them. Eat at the same table, sleep in the same bed, work in the same office. And yet, feel like you're speaking to a soul on a completely different frequency. The resonance is gone. The eyes no longer meet. The words feel hollow. And loneliness begins. Because the most terrifying kind of separation is not distance, but the feeling of being utterly alone in the midst of a crowd. It is the haunting realization that you are seeing something that no one else sees. That's the moment many awakened souls whisper to themselves, "Maybe I'm losing my mind." But the truth is, they are waking up. And the world around them is still asleep. Two parallel realities, not in the future, but now. This isn't a sci-fi projection. This isn't a post-apocalyptic fantasy. This is the present moment. Two realities are forming right now. One continues spiraling into noise, conflict, fear, and information warfare. The other is emerging quietly, where awakened souls find each other, rekindle intuition, and rebuild lost connection. These worlds haven't fully split. But they are drifting apart. And as Nostradamus once wrote, "When the world is torn in two, one half shall hear the music of the heavens. The other shall be deafened by its own shouting." We are living through a silent schism. No enemies. No borders. Just frequencies, pulling the soul of humanity into different timelines. And the most unsettling truth: you won't know which side you've chosen, until it's too late. Part 3, The Awakened, not a choice, but a calling. There is no ceremony. No mark on the forehead. No one hands you a sacred book and says, "From this moment on, you are awakened." Awakening is not a conscious decision. It is a subtle summons. A whisper from within. Arriving when you least expect it. It doesn't come after a deep meditation session. It doesn't arrive through a life-changing book. It comes in moments no one sees. While you're washing dishes, standing in an elevator, or watching sunlight slip through a door crack. And suddenly, you feel, everything I've been living might not be the whole truth. They don't seek the light finds them. Many imagine that the awakened are enlightened sages. Disciplined, serene, virtuous. But in truth, they are often the ones who were most lost. They've endured spiritual collapse. They've made regrettable choices. They've lived so long in the dark that when even the faintest light arrived, they no longer had the strength to resist it. They didn't go searching for awakening. They simply couldn't go on living the same way anymore. And then, one day, they felt it. A vibration from within. Not a voice, not a thought, but something deep, calling their name. Signs of the awakened: no one looks the same, but they recognize each other. There's no universal checklist. But if you've gone through it, you'll recognize these patterns. You avoid shallow conversations, even though you once enjoyed starting them. The outer world feels noisy and meaningless, while your inner world grows heavier, as if something is pressing to be born. You have strange dreams, or synchronicities too precise to be coincidence. You feel isolated among loved ones, yet sense a deep soul connection with a stranger's passing glance. And most importantly, you begin to question, not the world, but yourself. Why am I here? Why do I feel this way? What's been blinding me? Not a glorious path, but a journey of dissolution. Awakening does not catapult you to success. You don't become a guru, influencer, or healer overnight. What you do face is collapse. Relationships lose resonance. Work that once felt purposeful becomes hollow. Joys turn into empty rituals. This is the dismantling of the ego. A spiritual convulsion that few can articulate. Because awakening isn't a reward. It's a summons to inner war. A call to confront everything you've avoided. They're not awakened by the world, but by their own soul. You don't need to read 100 spiritual books. You don't need temples or teachers. What you need is brutal honesty. With the deepest feeling within you. And if you've begun to hear that wordless voice, if you feel caught between two worlds, if you're in pain, alone, yet unable to return to who you were, then perhaps you didn't choose to awaken. Perhaps you were simply one of those being called. The awakened are not chosen. They are those who could no longer pretend to be asleep. They don't follow a path. They don't quote doctrines. They have no mentors, no pre-planned journeys. They have only one compass. The call of the soul. And once you've heard that call, you can never pretend you didn't. Part 4, The Lost Ones, not evil, just asleep. We often tend to simplify things. That the awakened are good, and the unawakened are bad. But if Nostradamus was right, if the division is not between morality and sin, but between consciousness and unconsciousness, then the lost ones are not to be condemned. They are not evil. They are simply asleep in a dream they did not create. The collective sleep was engineered centuries ago. Humanity wasn't disconnected from its essence just in the 21st century. The soul's slumber was programmed long ago. Quietly, efficiently, and persistently. Education taught us to follow, not to feel. Religions emphasized sin, but forgot to nurture inner freedom. Media told us what the truth was, before we even thought to ask. Advertisements sold us feelings of joy, rather than helping us find real happiness. A dream, meticulously designed to make people believe they are awake, when in fact, they're functioning on autopilot. Signs of a soul asleep. They don't know they've been severed from their true self. They live without ever questioning the way they live. They speak in borrowed language, think in prepackaged ideologies, and feel through emotional filters crafted by the outside world. They may know a lot of information, but can no longer tell what's essential. They may succeed in life, but feel hollow when facing themselves. They may be socially integrated, but feel lonely when no one speaks the truth. And the most tragic part, they don't even know they've become disconnected. The game of distraction, where noise becomes the sedative. There's a clever mechanism that sustains the collective sleep. It doesn't crush the soul. It keeps it too busy to be heard. 24/7 news cycles. Endless drama. A life rushing forward, day after day. Social media reducing emotions into metrics. Creating addiction to feedback, while severing true connection. And amidst the chaos, silence becomes the most terrifying sound. Because in silence, the soul begins to whisper. And not everyone is ready to listen. They didn't choose to be lost, they were programmed not to wake up. Their disconnection isn't a conscious choice. It's a consequence. A consequence of generations shaped to choose. Safety over authenticity. Comfort over depth. Noise over truth. And when an awakened soul enters their world, they react as if threatened. They mock. They argue. They feel insulted when someone suggests, maybe, you're living inside a dream. Not because they're malicious, but because the idea of awakening shakes the very foundation they rely on to survive. Don't try to wake someone who's not ready. One of the greatest pains of being awake is the desire to awaken those you love. But eventually, you realize no one can be awakened by logic. Not through debate. Not through persuasion. Because this isn't a battle of ideologies. It is a migration of the soul. And that migration begins only when a crack appears from within. A tiny fracture. Just enough for the light to seep through. The lost are not the enemy. They are not opponents. They are reflections of who we once were. At a time when we, too, were not yet ready. And often, the awakened of today were once the deepest sleepers of all. Nostradamus never condemned them. He simply warned. Not everyone who sleeps will remain asleep. But if the sleep lasts too long, when the two paths have fully diverged, there may be no return. Part 5, the inversion of values and the final spiritual test. When the beast wears the robe of virtue, the wise shall be bound like the mad. Nostradamus. Perhaps the most unsettling prophecy Nostradamus ever penned wasn't about natural disasters, wars, or plagues. It was what he called the age of inversion. A time when truth is called falsehood. When fabrications are praised as fact. And when society rewards the wrong and punishes the right, without ever realizing it. When the mirror lies, and you no longer recognize yourself. Imagine standing before a mirror. But the reflection isn't you. It's the version of you the world wants to see. You smile when you don't feel joy. You agree when you don't believe. You applaud what you know is wrong. Just to avoid being cast out of the herd. This is the essence of the age of inversion. Not a collapse, but a systemic swapping of values. Honesty is branded as extremism. Caution is dismissed as paranoia. Doubt is labeled as rebellion. Silence, once sacred for inner listening, is mistaken for weakness. Everything once considered a moral pillar is now relabeled with new language. And that's where the soul begins to lose its way. The manipulators don't need to control you, they just rename everything. They don't need to burn books. They don't need to ban belief. They only need to rename the truth. And replace it with a version that's socially acceptable. Truth is no longer something you find. It's about choosing the correct side. Freedom is no longer self-governance. It's going along with the majority. Awakening is no longer a sacred journey. It's become a trendy lifestyle, easy to sell and easier to control. When words are inverted, reality fractures alongside them. People begin living inside a semantic matrix, where everything is diluted, blurred, reversed. And the only real feeling left is confusion. The final test, can you keep the flame alive within? Nostradamus once wrote, "Only those who pass through the mirror with fire shall see clearly in the time of inversion." This fire isn't the fire that destroys. It's the fire that purifies. The inner light. The resilient energy that refuses to collapse. When everything around you is turned upside down. Because the greatest challenge is not confronting external forces, but holding your soul steady. Even when the world insists that you are wrong. Can you stay silent when the crowd screams? Can you question when everyone else agrees? Can you trust your intuition when no one else stands beside you? That is the final test of the soul. And no one can take it for you. The price of awakening, to be misunderstood, labeled, and pushed out. In the age of inversion, truth doesn't die, it's framed. And those who carry it become the target. Called fanatics. Mocked as conspiracy theorists. Avoided for making others uncomfortable. Not because they're wrong, but because they no longer sync with the collective rhythm. In a world spiraling downward, those who stand still look like they're going the wrong way. But it is in this very hour that the doorway to awakening opens widest. There is a sacred paradox known across many ancient traditions. When the darkness is at its thickest, the smallest light becomes unmistakably clear. When all values are distorted, the soul has nothing left to cling to but the truth within. And in that moment, if you still hold your original flame, if you still speak truth even as your voice trembles, if you still dare to stand alone amid a flood of lies, then you are passing the greatest test of this age. The age of inversion doesn't destroy the soul, it reveals who has won. This is not a war of bombs. It is a filter of frequency. A spiritual sifting, not through violence, but through distorted perception. Nostradamus didn't write about an apocalypse of fire. He wrote about a world where light is renamed as darkness, and the bearer of truth is cast as the villain. In that world, the awakened must become the keepers of the flame. Not to illuminate the path for others, but to remind themselves. In the depths of confusion, there was once a time. I knew who I truly was. Part 6, Children of the Second Dawn, a generation awakening with memories not their own. After the Great Confusion, there will arise a generation with unusual eyes, and memories that do not belong to this lifetime. Nostradamus, from an obscure quatrain. Among the many forgotten quatrains of Nostradamus, one remains nearly erased from history, because it speaks of something few dare to believe. A generation not born to inherit the old world, but to rebuild the spiritual blueprint of humanity itself. Nostradamus called them the seeds of the second dawn. A phrase absent from any formal philosophical canon, yet striking in its resonance with what we are witnessing today. A new generation is emerging, marked by signs that defy convention. Many of today's children don't match the traditional definition of childhood found in outdated textbooks. They are unnaturally quiet, as if listening to a music adults can no longer hear. They gaze at grown-ups with an already knowing look, like answers were written into them before birth. They speak of things no one has taught them, past lives, the cosmos, reincarnation, or death, without fear, without confusion. Some remember a mother before this one. Others say, I lived somewhere else, with another name, another language. Modern psychology might label these moments as excessive imagination. But the awakened understand them for what they are. Soul memories, not of this lifetime. Born into chaos, to prepare a new order. These children often struggle to fit into the system society provides. They react negatively to rigid classrooms. They are uncomfortable in loud, overstimulated environments. They are diagnosed with terms like high-functioning autism, ADHD, or hypersensitivity. But in truth, they are not broken. It is the systems evaluating them that are outdated. They are not defective models of the old world. They are the new operating system, calibrated to run on frequencies our current world has not yet downloaded. To the awakened, these children are the bridges between worlds. Between one decaying and another yet to be born. Perception beyond logic, and a mission without words. The children of the second dawn carry rare qualities. They feel the emotions of others without needing them to be spoken. They are deeply influenced by air, light, and energy. As if their bodies are receivers for signals from the collective unconscious. They do not measure stranger or family by status, but by vibration. And more curiously, many of them know they have a mission, even though no one has told them. Ask one, what do you want to be when you grow up? And you may hear, I'm here to fix the world. I came to help people remember what they forgot. I'm only here for a while, I'll leave when the work is done. The loneliness of those who don't belong here. Though they carry profound spiritual gifts, these children often endure deep loneliness. They feel wrong for not fitting in. They're misunderstood and told to normalize themselves. They carry emotional burdens too large for their small frames. Many experience depression not because life is too harsh, but because the world doesn't align with what their inner knowing tells them is true. They are labeled as odd, fragile, overly emotional. But deep inside, they are ancient souls trapped in young bodies. And they are waiting for something most adults have forgotten. A shared memory of a realer world. The role of the awakened, not to teach, but to protect. You don't need to be their parent. If you have ever heard the silent voice of your own soul, you will recognize them. For their eyes reflect the light you thought you had lost. Awakened souls do not need to instruct them. Only to listen. To shield them. And to ensure the world doesn't extinguish their flame. Because as these children grow, they will not seek to repair the old order. They will forge a new frequency. And lay the first bridges between two worlds. Children of the second dawn did not come to blend in. They did not arrive to adapt. They came to disrupt the orbit of the old world. Not through war. Not through invention. But through consciousness. Through soul memory. Through a truth that cannot be diluted. Nostradamus did not name them. But he described beings whose eyes have glimpsed both worlds. And if you have ever seen that gaze, you will understand. They are not children. They are the final promise of humanity. Part 7, The Necessary Collapse and the Path that Opens. Old fortresses shall fall in silence. And from their ashes, a new form will rise. Not by power, but by vibration. Nostradamus. No system stands unchanged forever. No structure can endure once the collective frequency has evolved. And Nostradamus understood this more clearly than most. He didn't describe an apocalypse soaked in fire and blood. He foresaw a dissolution of the old structure. Not to end humanity, but to clear space for a new order of awareness. Collapse does not come from without, but from within. The breakdown Nostradamus spoke of doesn't begin with bombs or viruses. It begins the moment people stop believing in what they once held as truth. A parent questions the school system because their child is forced to memorize things that starve the soul. A patient senses that modern medicine is treating symptoms, not causes. A mind turns away from news broadcasts, guided by the intuition whispering, that's not the whole truth. And when millions share these fractures in perception, the foundations of the old world begin to tremble. The dissolution arrives quietly, and cannot be reversed. No sirens. No warning. No red alert. Just ordinary people, quietly refusing to play by the old rules. They quit jobs that drain their spirit. They learn to grow their own food, to meditate, to be still. They walk away from arguments that lead nowhere. They stop buying things they don't need to impress people they don't like. And with each silent act of resistance, the world built on conditioning begins to crack. To those clinging to the illusion, it will feel like the end. For those who haven't tuned out in time, the collapse of the old world may feel like a flood without escape. When financial systems lose trust. When political institutions contradict themselves. When social media becomes more addictive than connective. When science fails to explain the deep intuitive stirrings of the human soul. For those still clinging to decaying structures, it will feel like despair. But for those who left the illusion early, this moment is the first time they can finally breathe freely. The path isn't created, it's always been there, waiting. Nostradamus once wrote, "When the eagle loses all its feathers, it shall soar higher than ever, lifted by the bare wings of truth." This is not collapse as destruction. This is collapse as shedding. A rebirth not through accumulation, but through revelation. The new world will not be built from materials. It will be formed through inner clarity, connection beyond language, alignment with the living earth, and radical honesty with the self. There will be no constitution for this world. Because its laws will not be written on paper, but transmitted through the frequency you emit each day. The only way out is inward. The path does not lie outside of you. It passes through your own heart. To walk it, you must release all that is false. Outdated ideas of success. Roles that society cast upon you. Fears passed down through generations. Even beliefs you once called truth that were never tested by your soul. This path isn't smooth, but it's real. And once on it, you'll meet others. Not through eye contact, but through resonance. Collapse is necessary, because the old world cannot hold the new frequency. So if you find yourself among the wreckage of failed systems, broken roles, disintegrated identities, know this. You are not lost. You are on the right path. This road is not lit. It has no signs. No applause awaits you. But it's the only road that will lead you back to yourself. Without illusions. Without intermediaries. Nostradamus saw this. Not as a disaster to flee from, but as a collective molting, where ancient souls awaken inside present-day bodies, ready to begin again. From truth. We have journeyed together through forgotten quatrains. We have traced the path of a prophecy the world chose to ignore. We have witnessed the splitting of reality. Not across geography, but within the soul of humanity. On one side, there is light. On the other, black water. On one side, silent truth. On the other, endless noise. One side awakens. The other loops in a dream with no end. But the greatest question, the one that matters most, was never hidden in a prophecy. It was never written in ancient texts. It doesn't lie with any guru or seer. It lies in you. Right now. Sitting silently before this screen. Watching to the very end. Where do you stand between these two worlds? Have you ever felt slightly misaligned with ordinary reality? Felt that something is off, even if you couldn't explain why? Have you felt isolated? Not because you're broken, but because no one else seems to feel so deeply. If you have, then maybe, just maybe, you no longer belong to the old world. No one can certify that for you. There is no diploma for awakening. No test to prove you've crossed over. Only your heart, beating to a rhythm that no longer matches the mainstream, is your proof. And if your heart resonates with these words, if you feel yourself standing at an invisible crossroads, where you can no longer go back, but the road ahead is still unclear, then hear this. You are exactly where you need to be. The prophecy of Nostradamus was never meant to frighten. It was meant to awaken. Not to paralyze us with fear, but to remind us that the choice has already begun. And each vibration, each thought, each daily action is a step in one direction or the other. You don't need to take a giant leap. You only need to take one authentic step. And before this video ends, ask yourself, silently, without needing to explain to anyone. In a world that is dividing, where am I headed? Am I waking up? Or merely remembering that I once had? Because as Nostradamus once wrote, the world shall be one, but seen as two. One through the dark. One through the flame. If you still carry a flame within you, don't let it go out. Hold it. Feed it. And then, become the torch for someone else. We do not awaken alone. We only need to remember how to find each other again. Thank you for staying until the end. If something in you was stirred, share it. Leave a sign. A message. A question. We are reading. And perhaps they are too.